evening, everybody, and welcome to this TFA, Tenant Farmers Association webinar, which tonight is going to be a virtual discussion, which we have entitled A View from the Field, the Good, the Bad, and the Ugly of Tenant Farming. So before we get started, I just have a few housekeeping points to make. So if you don't know who I am, my name is George Dunn. I'm the Chief Executive of the Tenant Farmers Association, and I'm delighted to say that tonight's webinar and all of our online content is sponsored by Roy Thorne's Solicitors. Roy Thorne's are a national firm of solicitors, and they are steeped in agriculture with over 90 years experience. They've been advising landowners and tenant farmers alike, and their lawyers are also very active in many policy forums, so they do get the bigger picture. So whether it's about succession or about a new farm business tenancy or a dispute with your landlord or a share farming agreement or even a natural capital agreement, Roy Thorne's is there to help you and to assist. Now, if you miss any of tonight's webinar or want to re-watch it at a later time, it's going to be recorded. And once we've done a bit of editing, it'll be available on our YouTube channel. And to find our YouTube channel, just search at Tenant Farmers. And the TFA video library has all of our past virtual events, all our knowledge share teach-ins and key news snippets. And we encourage you to go and have a look to see what is available there and to subscribe to the channel so that you're notified whenever we upload new content. So, as I said, to find us, just search at Tenant Farmers. So, enough from me already, because tonight we are absolutely thrilled that our virtual discussion is going to be guest hosted by none other than Rachel Brown, who is the chief reporter at the Farmers Guardian. Woo! And once we have completed our introductions, Rachel's going to go through this in a moment. We'll kick off the session with some of our own questions. But if time allows, we will take some questions from the audience. So you will find a Q&A area, probably somewhere near the bottom of your screen, which is where you should put any questions that you want to put to any of the panel members and Rachel. Rachel might take a few questions from you, you never know. But put them in the Q&A there, and Rachel will look out for them and pick up those and ask them tonight as well. So I'm going to leave you in the very capable hands of Rachel to steer us through the evening's main event, and I'll be back to say cheerio at the end. So Rachel, the floor is yours.
Perfect. Thanks, George, and thank you for that lovely warm welcome. Hello, everyone. Good evening. It's a pleasure to host tonight's webinar, The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly of the Tenanted Sector, and to be hosting this session alongside such a fantastic panel tonight, and for an organisation like the TFA that lobbies so hard on behalf of its tenant farming members, which, let's face it, with the current political backdrop is needed right now more so than ever before. Being brought up on a tenant dairy farm myself, I have witnessed the highs and lows and the unique challenges that tenant farmers face, but what is clearly evident that when most tenant farmers face adversity, they are some of the most resilient farmers I have ever met, with a determination like no other and an incomparable work ethic. I may be biased, but I think it's important to give the tenanted sector credit, as often tenant farmers' voices are overlooked, undervalued, missed out, but in reality, tenant farmers are the integral core of British agriculture and its sustainable future going forward. Without tenant farmers, the industry would be half of what it is today. And at the Farmers Guardian, myself and the team are very passionate about ensuring tenant stories are heard. Right, let's get straight into it. First of all, I want to introduce our fantastic panel. First up, we have Emma Sturdy. Emma, if you just give a wave. Emma is a former executive PA, now turned solar campaigner. For the past 4 years, Emma and her husband Rob have been battling a solar development application on their AHA tenanted farmland in Old Malton, North Yorkshire. Something that I have covered extensively with the Farmers Guardian, and I know the TFA has supported Emma and Rob relentlessly every step of the way. Emma is a partner in the farming business, which comprises of 280 acres of arable farmland, growing wheat and barley crops, and they keep approximately 100 beef cattle. The couple also operate a garden waste recycling business as part of the farming enterprise. Emma will no doubt go into more detail about the challenges that her family have faced to keep hold of their tenant farm And of course, Emma's case is by no means unique, with many tenant farmers we know facing a similar situation. Next up, we have James Wright. James, if you can give a wave. James is a first generation beef and sheep farmer on Exmoor and UK country manager at Breedr, a livestock technology company. He is formerly a county council tenant. He now owns and rents the farm. Congratulations, James. Working alongside his wife with their 3 children. James enjoys combining hands-on farming experience with agricultural innovation. And last but not least, David Christensen. An interesting fact about David's family was that his father was one of the TFA's founding members, member number 2, I believe, David. So David and his family have a long recognition of the value of TFA's work. David operates 2 dairy units in Oxfordshire, a 600 cow autumn calving herd on an AHA tenancy and a 350 cow spring calving herd on an FBT agreement, which is run as a joint venture. In addition to this, he also has a joint venture for 350 of the autumn-born calves with another local farming family, and also keeps further cattle on a neighbour's arable farm. So David's very busy. Their farming is forage and grazing based. David's aim is to run a simple system that makes for easy management, and as a result allows for him and his family to have a good quality of life. Now, given that the title of the webinar is The Good, the Bad, the Ugly of the tenanted sector, I think it's a good place to start. So if we can keep to 5 minutes, panel, then we have lots of time later on for the session to go to the audience for questions. And as a reminder, and as George alluded to, please do send in any questions that you have for our panelists, and we'll try and get through as many as possible. Emma, if I can start with you, what is your good, bad and ugly of tenant farming, specifically to your farming business? I think I can guess what the bad and ugly has been over the last few years.
Yeah, thank you.
Emma, go ahead.
Thanks, Rachel. Yeah, good evening. I think it's, well, the good, if we start with the good, and there is lots of good. And I think that in these uncertain times in farming, we have to highlight the fact that we've got this lifetime AHA. It's the next best thing to owning your own farm. And we are very aware of how lucky we are to have it. Rob, my husband, is the 2nd generation of a 3-generation tenancy. So we've got one more succession. We have young children. There was a very clear path to that AHA. Rob had gone to agricultural college, gained experience, ticked all the boxes in order to take over the tenancy in 2015. So he's worked his entire life to running this farm, and that's the path that's been set out for us. The AHA obviously also gives you this long-term security, which is absolutely, crucial. And that sort of longevity has given us the ability really and the confidence to invest in the farm, to invest in the land, in the drainage over generations. We've put up our own grain store. We've invested heavily in machinery appropriate to the size of the farm that we have. And so it's given us the ability to manage the land as well and farm the land as well as we can. The home is obviously linked to the tenancy as well. So we treat the home as though it's our own, and we've invested heavily there. You said we've got a diversification business, which we started about 25 years ago. We recycle the garden waste from the local area. We spread it on the land. We turn it into compost, spread it on the land as a soil conditioner. And that has huge benefits for the land, as well as giving everybody an opportunity to offset their own emissions. It's a really positive diversification that we're actually really, really proud of. So in terms of that, that's all the positive. We farm as well as we can, and our AHA gives us the power to do that, really. Sadly, we do have to go on to the bad. And, I think for us, the AHA was not quite as watertight as we believed it to be. And, the AHA specifically contains these provisions that if a landlord obtains a planning permission for non-agricultural development, then he can serve a notice to quit on the tenant for the part of the land in question. Now, these loopholes exist. And, when the AHA was passed in 1986, nobody had ever really heard of things like solar farms or wind farms or rewilding. They were there for much more considered planning, things like housing, these loopholes. But I would say that AHAs really are not fit for purpose in today's world, really, and it's vital that they are updated. obviously, and compensation is a massive part of that as well, which no doubt we'll talk about. Opportunities for gaining new land are really limited. Purchasing land is beyond the realms of the ordinary farmer, unfortunately, these days. And gaining new land, particularly that's nearby your existing farm, is really rare. And then when it does come up, there's bidding wars and the economics don't always stack up. Another thing with the AHA, on-farm diversifications are really limited because, certainly in our tenancy, the main source of income actually has to come from agriculture. So you're very, very limited. And even then, if you do have an opportunity for diversification, because you have no capital entitlement to the land that you farm, gaining bank loans, offering up security can be difficult. So we have to focus on what we've got, which is our land, and we have to use that. Another bad, if I had to say, was probably the use of land agents. It's very common practice now for landlords and tenants to use agents. They're very costly. I think, sadly, very many agents, look to sort of maximize financial return for their clients rather than look for the best results for all parties involved in a dispute. So that's really, really unfortunate because we have to rely on them now. The ugly, goodness me, I could talk about this all night, but I'll try not to. When the landlord obviously seeks to take land back in hand, for example, it's well documented what's happened here, and the landlord submitted a planning application without any consultation with us on 42% of our arable land. So that's really, gosh, thrown us right into the path of a commercial development, and right into the hands of commercial developers who we are not equipped to deal with. The planning system doesn't really allow for tenant farming. It doesn't really have a knowledge of tenant farming. The solar side to things is a whole other issue. There are no solar regulations in this country by planning. There's no firm planning policy. So, and importantly, and the most important thing, I think, is the lack of compensation to tenant farmers who are caught up in the middle of all this kind of thing. So, it's hugely out of date. It doesn't reflect the real losses to the tenant, and it doesn't reflect the real gains to the landlord. So it's a completely unlevel playing field. So it's just a lot of uncertainty.
No, definitely. Some really good points there made around, loopholes in AHA, the planning system and not being fit for purpose for tenant farmers. And off the back of the spring statement today, there was a lot of emphasis on planning reform. Where do tenants fit within that? So it'd be good to delve a bit deeper in that a bit later on. So thanks for that, Emma.
Okay.
David, I wanted to go to you. The good, the bad and the ugly. If you can keep it quite concise, that'd be great. Thank you.
Okay. Well, first of all, thank you very much for the invitation to speak tonight. Really lovely to be involved. The good, so I'm broadening it slightly to the wider farming business, but two goods at the moment, and I'm breaking the rules by having two to start with, so apologies, Rachel.
No, don't worry.
But first of all, our general financial situation is pretty sensible at the moment, and I think it's important to say that when it is, so that equally when it's rubbish, people will believe us. So I have to say, as a dairy farmer supplying Arla and finishing rearing a lot of beef cattle as well, that's we're in a sensible place at the moment. So that's a good start. The other bit I find myself extremely fortunate is very positive relationships with both my key landlords and their agents. And when I hear of Emma's situation, it just highlights how fortunate we are. My main landlord is St John's College, Oxford University, and both the bursar of St John's and the key agent take a real interest in what we're doing, and they come and visit annually. They take the time to come to the farm, and I appreciate that. And it's the same at Lockinge Estate, where Thomas Lloyd takes an interest and he walks the farm every day, and Julian Sayers, who's the key agent for Thomas, also gets our world, and all of them understand and get our world. So we're very fortunate in those relationships, and they underpin everything we do. The bad, let's just talk about IHT for a moment, and I want to turn it as to what we're trying to do about it, because frankly, I don't think it's going away. We've got 3 kids. 2 of them won't go farming. One is a doctor, one is doing a PhD in quantum computing. I have no idea what that means. And the third will read economics, hopefully at university. But you never know. And so quite frequently farming kids get to about 30 and they have that Damascene moment and go, actually, you know, that lifestyle that mum and dad had, maybe it wasn't quite so stupid after all. So what we're doing is looking at putting a term life cover in place that will take us to the age of 75, Catherine and my wife and I, and would pay the tax bill were we to die inadvertently early before we'd handed the assets over. So by the age of 68 on the current rulings, we have to have made a decision and got assets out of the way. That's kind of our plan. We're just going through the medicals at the moment and all that sort of nonsense. And this is where you find out that you really shouldn't lie about your weight, because then you have the person coming to check and you think, oh, I wish I'd told the truth. So that's the bad on what we're trying to do about it. Two uglies. I'm really quite concerned that we might end up with a USA trade deal that would sacrifice UK ag. I think it would be very convenient for the government to be selling services and software and stuff like that to the Americans, and also with food inflation stubbornly high, it would be quite fortuitous and convenient to help bring that down too. I know they have said historically that they won't undercut standards, but frankly, they seem to have gone back on just about everything they've said so far, so I don't trust them on that either. So I think watch that space very carefully. The other is an internal issue with the industry, and that's the Bovea issue that happened before Christmas. As an Arla dairy farmer and heavily involved in Arla, the bit that I was disappointed about was the level of infighting within the industry at times. And frankly, we've got enough challenges from outside without scrapping amongst ourselves and using it to other advantage. And so I think we've got to be very cautious about that, because I don't think that was helpful for anyone. We're going to have to use these sort of technologies in the future to achieve what we need to achieve, and we can't afford to be throwing stones at each other so soon. So there you go. That's it. Thank you.
No, thank you, David. That was really interesting insight, specifically towards your, own situation on a dairy farm. And I thought it was quite interesting, that you're positive with that real good relationship that you have with your landlord, but actually we all know that that's not replicated elsewhere, but it's a key thing to enable your tenant farm to thrive. So a very, very valid point there. James, can I go to you? The good, bad and the ugly. You can go in whatever order you want.
Well, look, we'll start with the good. So I'm the first farmer in my family for 100 years. You talked to my brother for more than 100 years, and there's no possible way I could have got into farming if it wasn't for a tenancy. Literally, I bought 2 pigs with my student loan. I met a guy who had a corner of a field, and on a handshake, he let me have those sort of fenced 4 acres, and never would have had the opportunity if it wasn't for that. And every single landlord that I've had has taken a risk on me that a bank never would have. Tenant farming gave me my start. And the great thing about tenant farming as well is a brilliant community. There are lots of very supportive tenant farmers and advisors, like Tenant Farmers Association. I should just name a couple of people, but Rob Halliday down in Cornwall was always on the end of the phone. Years of experience. Sam Pearson, a tenant share farmer in Wales. And all sorts of people were just always willing to help. So it's a brilliant community. The bad is the lack of opportunity. So I think one example sticks out that we applied for a Duchy of Cornwall tenancy. I remember on the viewing day, there were 150 people who viewed the farm. The agent told us 70 applied. We got shortlisted with 12. And then the farm goes to one family. And, there were 150 people who viewed the farm. And the agent said there were there were 12 good enough that any of the 12 that were shortlisted could have had the farm. So it's, the lack of supply is the problem. And how do we grow the industry sustainably? We're very fortunate. We've managed to buy our own 44 acres and a house. And it happened to be the chap who sold us the farm also had a farm next door that he was retiring from farming and wanted to stay in the farmhouse, so we've been able to rent that as well, and we've ended up in this wonderful situation where we've got a 160 acre ring fenced farm. But that is not a model that can be replicated across the country. It's something that's worked for us, and my big thing is how do we get those opportunities? And then the ugly, we've been doing this for long enough now. We've had every sort of agreement: a handshake, a grazing license, a share farm, an FBT. And it's fair to say we've been shafted more than once, and the varying quality of agents and landlords is enormous, and that really can make or break the relationship. But if we go back to the beginning, I never would have got the opportunity if someone hadn't taken a risk on me. So it's not all bad.
No, brilliant. Thank you, James. It's interesting, all three of you kind of focused in on how policy can impact the way you run your tenant farming business. And what I'm interested in is terms of, do you think in terms of how policy is being introduced at the moment, there is a real understanding of what the tenanted sector is all about and what is needed, and it's more of a bespoke policy needed to formulate for a tenanted farmer? James, do you want to go ahead? Or no, Emma, you go first.
Yeah, I mean, we are evidence that sort of planning policy and government policy has let down the tenanted sector by a failure to, well, not a failure to understand, is certainly the Secretary of State in award, granting the decision of this solar farm, recognised the impact on the tenant, recognised that actually this solar application would cause, as we've said, irreversible detriment to a successful farming business, but then was prepared to grant the application in the knowledge that the compensation was, out of date. So the current government policy and the current planning policy certainly doesn't enhance or protect tenants appropriately, I don't think, no.
Perfect. Thank you, Emma. And James, you talked about one of the bad side of the tenanted sector in terms of the lack of opportunity out there. Obviously, you were given that early opportunity, but on the whole, there is, not many opportunities for tenants to get into the sector. How do we change that?
Oh, I could talk about this for hours, but I mean, I'll talk about my free. I've got free. The first thing is that you've got to de-risk it for the landlord, right? We've got to encourage landlords to take a risk on new entrants and tenants in general. And in Ireland, there's a great model where if you rent your farm to a young farmer, your income from that rental is income tax free. So basically, you're getting an extra 20-30% on your rent by renting to a young farmer. So instantly, that makes it worth the risk. And there's loads of other stuff we could do. There was this brilliant thing called the Rock Review, which we all did 2 years ago, whatever it was, that had loads of policy advice. And it really would be good to see somebody take that forward, because ultimately a tenant, a new entrant, is risky, and so you've got to find some way to de-risk that. The other thing we could do, is things like capital grants. Instead of paying them retrospectively, you upfront it like a loan, which will really help young farmers, new entrants, cash flow. Farmers don't need handouts. What we just need is some money to grease the wheels in getting a business going. I mean, we had a heifer born this afternoon. I want to keep that heifer and put her in the breeding herd, but that is a 3-year investment before I'm going to see any cash back, right? And I'm 32, so I haven't got 30 years worth of money sitting behind me to allow me to do that. So it's in the margins, though we need a bit of support.
And that's something that I wanted to pick up on was, investment. It's a whole different ballgame when you are a tenant farmer, because you really have to justify that investment putting into your business, that you're going to get that return. How do you weigh up investment decisions, David?
I have to say, of late, I'm very keen on investment, actually. I'm probably more excited now about farming than I have been through my farming career, which probably seems slightly counterintuitive given government policy at the moment. And just specifically coming back to government policy and consideration of tenants, I was sat on the slurry working group with DEFRA last year, and certainly it was regularly fed in, and they got the understanding of the difference between tenants and landlords. Now, the whole thing collapsed with the government and hasn't been started up since, which is a disappointment to all of us that were involved in that, because we put a lot of work in and thought we were making some progress. Just going back to capital, we've got, so on the AHA, there's written down time scale, so I'm not afraid of investing on that. I'm 57, no obvious successor, so that's starting to count on me now, is just how much more money do I want to put into the holding if the kids aren't coming home. But we're fairly well capitalised. We're pretty well capitalised, actually. We've done a lot over the last few years. The the FBT, even more so, because that's not reclaimable. So I do have to be even more careful on there. The landlord, in fairness, has helped us with investment in the past.
That's what I was going to touch upon, David.
Yeah, no,
with that relationship.
Yeah, they put the barn up and we're paying interest on the money at a pre-arranged rate, and we're doing that for a certain length of time. So that was hugely helpful in that relationship. But I think, as always, it's a bit of give and take here. So some of the investment is down to us, and currently we're doing some other investment up there because we believe in the place. And as I think you mentioned, we run that as a JV. The JV partner is potentially our exit from that business in the future, if we can make it work out with the estate, and equally crucially a milk contract as well. So I'm always slightly anxious that we don't overcapitalise that second business, because there's a young couple that would need to buy us out, and I keep saying we can spend so much, but we don't want to spend too much, because otherwise you're not going to be able to afford to buy us out. So.
No, that makes sense. And Emma, how do you in terms of investment, obviously it's been such an uncertain time over the last couple of years. How does your situation differ? And obviously with a kind of different relationship with landlord and land agent compared to David, how's that affected your investment decisions?
I know I'm really conscious that I sound really negative, and I'm trying not to, because I think there's so much to be positive about. But we've just come out of the back of a very tricky situation. So absolutely. I think, just to go back very briefly, but I think that what James said about the ROC review is absolutely vital. And I think it's really important that we're getting this tenant farming commissioner. I think that's a really, really important step forward. But in terms of investment, I mean, we should have that security. And like I said, we've always really thought we had, and we have to carry on. Unfortunately, we don't have that security now. Life feels very fragile. We should... How do we know whether we've got land this time next year? The planning approval has just been given. So the next process is serving a notice to quit. That will be contested. It's a long process. Will we get a harvest this year? We have no idea. So planning is almost impossible. But we just have to get on with it, But in terms of investment, it's very difficult. We're thinking we have to sell machinery to pay finance and legal bills and professional fees that we've had to hold for the last 4 years. So when we should, and my husband's 53, so we're at a point in our life where we shouldn't really be doing this. We should be looking forward. But the future is going to look very different. And certainly, things like SFI, are way down our list now, because every bit of land that we have will have to work as hard as it can in order for us to make any money now. So it's just so uncertain for us now. It's very difficult for any investment, I would say.
Yeah, no, definitely. And in terms of planning reform, obviously there was a lot of emphasis in the Chancellor's statement today around planning changes, and the compulsory orders. As a tenant farmer, how concerned are you around maybe decision making happening with the landlord about how they want to use their land, and could that put your farm at jeopardy?
Yeah, of course, because the landlords are being incentivized really to take land out of food production and tenancies. So it's deeply worrying, isn't it, that the tenant farmers are just sort of collateral damage in the middle, really.
Is that something that, definitely. Is that something that you're concerned about, David? Or do you feel like that, it's not going to be an issue going forward?
So it's a double-edged sword, really. There are two angles to it. One is, for all the nonsense coming out of, that's not fair, for all the stuff coming out of government at the moment, they are actually starting to try and make things happen in terms of planning and stuff like that. And when I look at the last government, frankly, it was a shambles and nothing happened. So, and in a country as overpopulated as ours, you are going to have to bang a few heads together to make stuff happen. So I kind of admire that bit, that they're trying to get houses built, because quite how our kids are going to afford houses in the future, I do not know, given the current shortage. So I admire that bit. I think, and I probably, the viewers will look at this and think I've completely lost my marbles, but I do just begin to sense that things might be changing, or there might be a growing awareness of the fragility of food production. and the basis on which we've operated the model to date. I went to listen to Professor Tim Benton speak last week at an RASE event, and the bit that stuck with me was that he said that he was asked to go and speak to DEFRA 5 years ago, and there were 20 people in the room. He was asked to go and speak 2 weeks ago, and there were 100 people in the room, and they asked him back within a week. And so I sit there going, so why? What's going on there? Is that stubborn food price inflation driving that? Or is there a bit of a penny dropping moment that actually we need to be thinking about the level of domestic food production and looking after it a bit more, and not letting the country be completely overrun by solar panels and houses, etc., etc. So time will tell on that one. But frankly, given the fantastic food production potential we have in the UK, it would be folly in every sense not to optimise that.
Yeah, definitely. It's all about striking the balance. James, did you want to add anything to that?
I am of a generation where we need more housing, and I agree with David. We haven't built enough homes over the last 14 years, and we do need to speed up everything. I mean, I don't know if you saw, but the Upper Thames crossing has been agreed, but the planning permission has cost 300 million. Norway built a tunnel between two of their major cities for that amount of money. So we do have a problem in the UK. But Emma is a prime example of the collateral damage and the devastation to a family when that happens. So I think the answer is whatever happens needs to be done with proper compensation, communication, and remembering that there's a person at the other end, which is what the Tenant Farmers Commissioner is there for, to police that. So let's get that going. And
I wanted to touch upon the Tenant Farming Commissioner because, you know, this is a role that was approved by the previous government and obviously the current government, but we are still in the recruitment process of this Tenant Farming Commissioner. So whilst a lot is happening, we still haven't had someone in place, and it's going to take some time for them to put, you know, go through all the claims, and, you know, it's going to be a huge in tray for that incoming person. How valuable is this Tenant Farming Commissioner going to be for the tenanted sector to ensure it's thriving going forward?
I think for us, it would have given us perhaps an opportunity. You know, the TFA are marvellous, and, you know, I can't thank them enough for the work that they do and continue to do. But it maybe would have given us an extra road into government to try and influence or to understand that our message is getting through, because at the moment you feel like sometimes, you know, you're just banging on a door that, you know, they don't recognize what the real issues are, and that it's too big a problem to solve. You know, things like AHAs are probably a thing of the past, but those AHAs that exist, you know, must be honoured. And if they're not going to be honoured, they must be appropriately compensated. I mean, all this conversation just says, doesn't it? The good, the bad, and the ugly depends so much on the beast that you're dealing with. You know, the landlord that you're dealing with is the absolute crux of everything.
No, absolutely. David, did you want to add anything?
I think the crux is how much teeth they've got. And what stands behind that in terms of compensation, because James nailed it. It's about adequate compensation. This stuff has to happen, because if it doesn't happen, our country just stagnates. And so some land is going to have to disappear, and inevitably some of that's going to be tenanted land. So it's about fairness of compensation to allow those that are displaced to go and try and find something else elsewhere. And as James already alluded to, that's really difficult in the first instance. It's even more impossible if you didn't get a fair compensation for what you were doing to start with. So somehow we've got to try and engender that in there. Now, given that the government don't want any impediment to development, and it's remarkable what's happening at the moment. It's this sort of like this. It's almost communist government at work in terms of what they're trying to achieve to bang heads together. I'm not that confident we're going to get that, because all they'll see is that as a blocker and something to slow their progress. So I'm struggling to come up with a constructive answer.
And for you, James, how important is this Tenant Farming Commissioner?
Yeah, it'd be great.
I sense the frustration that you just want the person to be in place now, in position.
Yeah, I mean, look, I mean, I'm not allowed to make political points, so I'll be quiet. Yeah, no, we need it.
Yes. So, moving on, going to talk about tenancy. So Emma, you said at the beginning of your talk around, the loopholes in AHA tenancies, how we've moved on from AHA tenancies. In your view, what does the perfect tenancy agreement look like?
Oh my goodness, that's a very difficult question. Well, obviously, yeah, these loopholes that exist at the moment can literally just pull the rug from beneath your feet, completely. But as David's alluded, it's really about compensation. So I think we do need new tenancies that, recognize the investment that we put in, and that, oh God, it's such a difficult question, but that work for both landlord and tenant. I fully appreciate, things have to be appealing for landlords as well as tenants. It's got to be a relationship, and Rob and I would want nothing more than to have a really good relationship with our landlord. And actually, historically, we have. This just came out of the blue. So we just need to be protected. Tenants must be protected. They must be well compensated if they're to lose land. But it's about working together, seeing what great environmental schemes you can come up with together. Looking after the land. Investing in the home, investing in everything, like we've put up grain stores, but how it has to work for all parties, doesn't it? For both parties, and what that looks like, I don't know.
No, I think that's a valid point in terms of working for both the tenant and the landlord. David, in your eyes, what is the ideal tenancy?
So I've written down 3 words here, which is term, investment and compensation, and those for me are the 3 cruxes. We need a sensible length of tenancy to be able to invest, and
in your eyes, David, what do you think that is?
Well, that's 10 minimum, more like 15 to 20, because with concrete at £160 a cubic meter now, this is it is significant. And everything, as we know, following Ukraine, everything rose up. A lot of it's not deflated. We're looking at more costs coming with the carbon border tax adjustment on the 1st of Jan 27. That's going to raise steel prices, concrete prices, etc. So none of this stuff is going backwards. So we need enough term to justify then the investment. We need enough clarity about how the investment is funded. If it's the tenant doing it, then what's the write down periods? How does that work? And then exactly to Emma's point, we need something in there about compensation should that situation change, because this is all about confidence. And it's all about giving tenants confidence that they can invest in the holding and get on with it, knowing they're going to be in a sensible place.
And I think that the key of that is communication, isn't it? Because, too much in the past, we relied so much on those handshakes, those verbal agreements, but actually nowadays it's so important that everything is documented and those conversations happen early on.
I think in every sense, it's never been more important to have the right professionals advising you.
Yeah.
And I mean in every sense, the accountant, lawyer, and banker, all the rest of it, land agent, TFA, whatever. It's so fundamental to get sound advice.
No, absolutely. And James, in your eyes, what is an ideal tenancy?
Well, the great thing about moving from the Agricultural Holdings Act to the farm business tenancy is that you could write anything you wanted into that agreement. The whole point of the FBT is you can literally write in everything. It's not on rails like the old AHA was. And, as a new entrant, the amount of AHA tenanted farms that I visited where the tenants haven't treated the farm particularly well because they haven't had to pay a lot of rent. I remember a neighbour who was on an AHA tenancy and was getting 3 times the amount in subsidy than they were paying for a 400-acre farm which had 2 houses, and there I was next door paying £200 an acre rent, and with a house on top, and I was thinking, gosh, this isn't fair. So there are horses for courses, but I think the best thing is what we need to do is increase the supply of land, because by increasing the supply of land, we'll make landlords compete for good quality tenants, and therefore the good quality tenants like David, like Emma, can set their terms. Because then you end up with a fair relationship. At the moment, we don't have enough supply because there aren't the incentives to rent out. on long-term agreements, so we're in a sort of a seller's market, so they can take advantage. I think that is how we fix things, because actually the 1995 FBT Act actually allows people to put in whatever they want in there. The only other thing I'll say is in New Zealand, milk share farming is actually enshrined in statute. There is actually an example, sort of off-the-shelf bit of legislation that protects share milkers. I'm not saying we should do that, but I do know of friends of other people in the industry who have been taken advantage of in share farming relationships because it's tax advantageous for the landlord. And they're very young, maybe slightly naive. They don't have the great advice that David's got, and they then get taken advantage of. So, in this world of, what does share farming agreements look like? We probably do need to just, protect those people a bit more than we are at the moment, because it is a little bit rife for sort of taking advantage of the tenant.
And because now you're on an FBT, obviously with that, compared to an AHA, there's less certainty, in terms of kind of how long you're going to be on that farm. So how are you ensuring that you've got confidence that you're going to be there for the long term?
Well, I mean, my landlord was helping me tag calves this morning and text me as I was having dinner saying, "Can I see you at 9 a.m. to help me tag some more?" So I think we will be here for a while. But yeah, I mean, it's about having those conversations regularly. And we've got a 3-year FBT here. We're already a year into it. So, this time next year we'll be having those conversations and saying, are we going to renew? I've learnt my lessons. When we came in here, we soil tested the farm. I've got those all now. And if we were to leave, I'll make sure we get our money for our lime and our fertilizer back. I hadn't done that in the past, and so, yeah, I think it's sort of hope for the best, plan for the worst.
Definitely. I want to touch upon diversification and some of the barriers that some tenants face in terms of being able to diversify and farm. How can we in the sector overcome those challenges? Is it down to those contract agreements? How do we really kind of make sure that, lots of tenant farmers can really grasp hold of some of these diversification opportunities if they want to? David, if I go to you first, and I'll go to Emma.
So I was hoping you might go to someone else first, because I'm the most diversified farmer you can probably meet. I've very much laid out our stall that we will focus on the core business and try and do that at scale and do it reasonably well, deliberately. However, that said, we do have a tiny ice cream making business that my wife runs. And if we're honest, it's a professional hobby rather than a profit-making business. But again, good communication with the landlord was crucial, and they okayed it, and we run from there. Broader than that, I'm probably slightly outside my comfort zone here, except that it should be in the interest of both parties here, because if it secures the business, the core ability to pay the rent, then the landlords really ought to encourage it. And again, then it comes down to the legislation and the teeth and the commissioner and that stands behind it to facilitate it all happening.
No, definitely. Emma, do you want to pick up? Because I know obviously you have diversification on your farm.
Yeah, we do. So I said about 25 years ago, Rob's father was quite forward thinking, and it's something we do with the local authority. It's not it's a contract thing. It lasts 4 years, so it gets renewed. There's a bit of work at it. Rob has to sit an exam every couple of years, a waste management exam. And yeah, the local council lorries, it works for them because we're quite near the tip, so they deliver all their the garden waste to us. We recycle it all, we turn it into compost, we put it on the land, and yeah, it's good for the soil. It's increases all our biodiversity. It reduces our reliance on inorganic fertilizers, that kind of thing. And it's a really good circular process that is very in keeping with where we live in Malton. We're a circular town, so there's lots to shout out about it. And obviously it's an agricultural diversification. So in terms of it running alongside the AHA, it's within that tenant, so within the agreement, it's allowed. We did seek permission, obviously, to do it first. But again, the tenancies have got to be flexible enough to have that in so that you can look at diversifications. And ours, as I said, is because it's old school, old fashioned, it's got to be an, main source of income has to come from agriculture. So, you'd have to make sure that you were, if you were wanting to say do a barn conversion or something, that could be quite tricky. And as I said before, we don't necessarily have the capital to put that in. With the AHA, we probably would get the return on it. But like I said, at the moment, that's all a bit fragile. But I think it's just got to be written into the tenancies that it allows you, diversification allows you to move with the times, doesn't it? If we're losing land, which we are doing, and it is going to happen, and I accept that's going to happen, then farmers do have to look to other sources and other means to be able to run a profitable business.
No, thank you for that, Emma. I'm conscious that we've got a quarter of an hour left, so I just want to go to some questions from the audience. We've had a question from Rob Halliday. I think, James, you gave him a shout out earlier. Fundamentally, is much of the future tenanted land supply down to the Treasury and their treatment of landlords? If we overprotect tenants, we risk reducing the supply. So a bit of a statement there, but also a question. James, do you want to come back on that?
I was definitely reading something. Rachel, say that again.
Oh, no, don't worry. Basically, it was much the future, the tenanted land supply, is that down to the Treasury and their treatment of landlords?
Yes, because until it becomes tax advantageous to let your land out rather than keep it and farm it in hand and then, do a tenancy on the side, which is what they all do, then absolutely. And what we need to do, and George has been banging on about this for years, is we need to incentivize landlords to rent farms out on not long-term, not 20, 30-year tenancies, 7, 10 years is enough. And then the supply of land will increase. Until that happens, we're stuck in the same situation, even if we have a tenant farmers commissioner.
Do you want to add anything else to that?
No, only to say, James is quite right. It's always about money at the end of the day. So if you put it, whether it's carrot or stick or whatever, that's what will change all our behaviour. So if you can get that through, then you'll start to see it change.
Yeah, I agree. I think, but whilst landlords now are being dangled these large carrots for renting their land for non-agricultural stuff, they're never going to be incentivized to rent for a tenant farmer, are they? When, for example, solar, you're looking at sort of £12,000 an acre per year. So you can see what chance has a tenant farmer got to compete with that.
Definitely. I want to get a question from Robert Martin. So obviously Robert from the TFA. What advice would you give to a young self starting off as a tenant farmer? So I want to put this to each of you on this question. So if we start off with Emma, what advice would you give to a young self starting as a tenant farmer?
Oh my goodness. I was going to say, don't skimp on your insurance, your legal assistance and all of that kind of thing. Join the Tenant Farmers Association. That's my bit of advice.
There we go. Thank you for that, Emma. David?
So cash is always king in any business in the short term. So do the budgets. I know they're a grind doing spreadsheets and all the rest of it, or pay someone to do it for you, or get a friend to do it that understands it. But cash is utterly king. Communication is fundamental. We've heard it a number of times tonight. So regular communication with the landlord and with the financiers. And as soon as you've got stability and you're confident, then invest as soon as you can, because the sooner you do it, the more efficient you get, the more time you've got to write it off, and the more you enjoy your farming. So if I look back at myself, I think I probably lacked a bit of confidence earlier on in terms of getting on in investing, and it would have been better to invest sooner. So as soon as that stability, you feel confident about the stability, and keep coming back to confidence so much tonight. As soon as you've got that, go for it.
I think a lot of tenant farmers would echo that, and some maybe have an element of regret that they didn't do investment sooner, because I think, obviously you've got that write-off period that you need to complete. So I think that's really sound advice. Go ahead, James.
Well, I'm going to reveal some of my trade secrets now. I'm just trying to find if I could find it. So when we'd been tenant farming for about 3 or 4 years, we were halfway through our sort of county council tenancy, and I did a couple of things. So I did a little flyer And I literally drove around every single farm in the local area and dropped it off. And it was like young couple looking for farm. And we got a bit of land out of that. But this, I recommend this. So on the Central Agriculturers and Valuers website, there is a list of every single registered land agent in the country with their address, not their email, but with their address. And I wrote a letter, a handwritten letter to every single one of those people with my business card in to say that my wife and I are looking for a tenancy. And off the back of that, we got invited down to meet with 4 or 5 of them. And there were 2 or 3 decent opportunities that, had we needed them, we could have taken them, but we ended up here instead. So if you are a young farmer and listening to this, go on the website, find them, write a handwritten letter. They always appreciate it, and they might not have something now, but in a year's time, 18 months' time, there might be an elderly farmer who's retiring who wants a young farming family to take on the farm, and you could be that person. So I recommend doing that.
Goodness,
how long does that
take, James? Oh my goodness.
You will also then bump into them, and they'll go, "Oh, you wrote me a letter. It was a little bit awkward, but
No, definitely.
I agree with that.
And perseverance, I think, key there.
I agree with that approach. I think James is obviously young and youthful and has this lovely approach. And I think actually sometimes it can be very, certainly, as you get older, not that I'm talking about myself, of course, there can be this real reluctance amongst farmers to talk about, God, I could really do with some land, and put the feelers out there. And I sense that that's not the done thing. So I think it's really refreshing to hear someone like James say, you've just got to get yourself out there, because actually I do think that there's no harm in asking, there's no harm in putting the feelers out there, because that's how it works, isn't it?
No, definitely.
I would also just like to say that we've got a very good land agent. I wasn't slagging off mine when I said earlier about land agents.
No,
But yeah, good land agent is also another piece of advice for a tenant farmer starting off.
No, definitely. And I want to go to each of you on this next question in terms of the future of your farming business. What if there was one kind of opportunity or one positive element that you really want to focus on in terms of kind of the future of your farm business, what would that be? If we go around, so if we start at James and then go to David and then Emma.
Well, I mean, we've just had our 3rd child, and I can see us being here for a good long time. But how do we keep that 160-acre farm? I work alongside farming. I don't need the full-time income from a farm. I'm not looking to get to 300 or 400 acres. But then when I think about, well, what happens if one of my children wants to farm? What's their future? We've got lots of second-hand machinery. I can't really afford to replace that at the moment with the way things are. So there are sort of a few sort of things in my head being like, okay, yeah, 160 acres. Yes, okay, I don't need the full-time income off the farm. It needs to make money. It doesn't need to bring in a salary to pay the bills. But then it does need to bring in enough to reinvest. We're not there yet. I need to work out what that looks like. Some people might start selling meat locally, but that's a full-time job in itself. Could we do pedigrees, with stabilizer cattle? Is there something there? Could it be sheep? I don't know. So there is something there.
So almost like a challenge there, but one that could turn into an opportunity going forward.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Perfect. David.
So clearly, as a 57-year-old with no obvious successor, we're at a different stage, and it's quite interesting listening to James talk and making me reflect on myself. So we're probably in a bit of a holding pattern now, whilst we give the kids time to see if they want to go farming in the future or not, and hence the discussion about IHT earlier on. So what are we focusing on? Actually, it's just a relentless focus on efficiencies and just trying to do the day job really well. And it's not going to be one lot of 10%. It's going to be 10 lots of 1%. And actually, I think there's so much potential yet within our business. So there's plenty to keep me occupied doing that and just get better at what we do. And I think that will keep us in a sensible place, allow the kids the time to make that decision. And if not, then we sail off into the sunset at some stage in the future. possibly having set someone else up in business, because we've done that throughout our farming career. And I think we've set probably 6 people up in business now, farming in their own right or running their own businesses. So that would be a great outcome for us.
No, definitely. And would you say, as a tenant farmer, you have almost to have that laser focus even more than an owner occupied, just to kind of focus on efficiency and those margins?
Fundamentally, I mean, when I have groups to the farm, it's one of my opening lines is for tenant farmers, we have to pedal that bit faster than my equivalent hypothetical owner occupier next door. So absolutely you do, to pay the rent and do everything else you're trying to do. So yes, and that's what drives, I think James mentioned it earlier on, the I think you mentioned actually, Rachel, the nature of tenant farmers. We are pretty bloody robust. And inventive and diligent and hardworking, etc., because above all, you've got a rent to pay first and foremost.
No, absolutely. And Emma?
It's a tricky one. I think at the moment we're focusing on day by day, just survival. But I think the future I think we have to get our head around the fact that the future could potentially look very different to what we thought it could. And something I try to say to Rob is that, well, it's much easier for me to say it than for him, but just because something isn't as it was mapped out to be doesn't mean that it can't still work and be successful, and other opportunities can present themselves when things go wrong, as this has gone wrong. And so although it looks different and it isn't as planned, I think that there is lots of positives, and that we have to try and this time next year or the year after be able to come back with something else and say, look what we have done, in the face of this adversity, look what we've built, and look at this new opportunity we've got now. We have young children as well. They're 8 and 11. They are the next generation of this farm, as by the tenancy. So they're too young yet to know. So if we can try and hold on to it all for just a little bit longer, so at least, because you don't want to be that one that gives it up or fails, and we haven't. I think we hold our heads very high at this point, actually, and I think hopefully we will rebuild this business. We've certainly got the determination, so fingers crossed.
No, definitely. Fingers crossed for your family too, Emma. I think that is it for now. I've been prompted that we're running out of time. The time has flown. And I'm going to pass over to George, but I just want to say a massive thank you to Emma, James and David for such an insightful discussion. Really, really good. So thank you very much.
Wow, what an hour we've just had. And I was, in some respects, getting a bit emotional. I've been doing this job here for over 28 years, and just to hear you all talking about the issues that we deal with day in and day out with members in the industry and with DEFRA and with the Treasury is just absolutely fabulous. So a huge thanks to Rachel for being our guest host tonight. And Rachel, thank you so much for all that you do in Farmer Guardian and all that you report on and all the holding truth to power and just saying it as it is. We really are grateful to you and Farmers Guardian for the work that you do to support the industry and to tell our stories, and that's really important. But thanks also for tonight. Really good night. And thanks to our panelists. Thanks to Emma. Emma, you and Rob have been so brave and so up for the fight, and it's amazing to hear you be so positive when things are so bad for you and the family. So thank you so much for spending some time with us. And James, thanks for your perspective, and thanks for keeping the politics out of it tonight, because I know you got some of that going on. But it's been really good to get your perspective as a new entrant. And some of you may not know this, but David's father was a founding member of the TFA back in 1981. I think he was member number 6. Is that right, David? I think.
I think it's number 2.
Number 2. Apologies. Sorry.
Number 2. So yeah.
Yeah. So it's great to have some succession even within the TFA and within its membership. So David, thank you so much for being with us tonight, and thanks also to our sponsors, Roy Thorns, as I said, who are sponsoring tonight, and all of our virtual material online. Now, just before we sign off, I just wanted to let you know that our next webinar is going to be on Wednesday, the 21st of May And at that webinar, we are covering the topic from conflict to resolution, lifting the lid on arbitration, a tenant farmer's guide. And it will feature an expert guest speaker who is an arbitrator herself, Ruth Farrell, who is from DJM Consulting. So that is certainly a webinar not to miss. And if you want something a bit more face-to-face, then we are having a conference at Windsor with the Crown Estate and with Burgess Salmon. And the title of that is Reimagining the Landlord-Tenant Relationship in Agriculture, and does the Crown Estate Rural Strategy offer a way forward for others? And we'll be looking at the new Crown Estate Environmental FBT, which is we've been working with the Crown Estate on for the past year, and which the Crown Estate wants to provide as a template for other landlords to pick up. So maybe that answers Rachel's earlier question as to what's a good tenancy agreement. Let's have a look at this EFBT agreement. It is a ticketed event. It's 1st of May, as I say, at the York Club at Windsor Great Park. TFA members can get a 50% discount on tickets if you book online through the website, but it's also now available to non-members as well. So as it's just ticked over into 1 minute past 8, I shall say I hope you found this evening's discussion helpful and useful, and I wish you all the very best for the rest of your evening. Take care. Good night.